Northern Ireland, it's impossible for people to understand this now, but it literally used to dominate the news headlines. I mean, virtually every other morning there would be acts of terrorism, there would be people killed, there'd be assassinations, and Northern Ireland itself was just completely riven by this conflict.
If the Troubles had continued on, we would have continued to lose thousands of people. And when you look at the 25 years before that, 3,721 people died, 30,000 people seriously injured, between shootings and bombing, something like 50, 60,000. And as an American station said to me the other day, in American terms, that would have meant 700,000 people killed,
It is an agreement that could never be produced in 2023 because social media would have destroyed any element of organisation, of keeping secrets, of ensuring that people didn't say things from left field that drove everybody else mad. There was enough of that going on at the time, even with people coming out doing pieces to camera. Most people had a belief that it was heading in a direction that there were major obstacles, particularly around the whole issue of the release of prisoners and some other problems that had to be dealt with. And nobody could see how David Trimble could accept such a concession, but without that concession being accepted, then there was no way in which a deal could be done. And it went over and back, over and back, over and back all morning. John Taylor, who had been one of the most negative voices for the days running into the conclusion of these talks, then started to come out and started being very positive. And at that point, everything just accelerated. You had this sense that we were moving towards something dramatic. Bertie Ahern leaving, going south to his mother's funeral, coming back up, being raw, exhausted.
The two governments have together now reached a joint decision.
Good Friday Agreement.
The Good Friday Agreement.
The Agreement.
Peace Agreement.
And Good Friday Agreement.
The Good Friday Agreement.
The Good Friday Agreement.
The Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, began life about 2 years previously. George Mitchell, the former US Senator, had been deeply involved, had been appointed as chair as the talks.
The two governments and the political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
As he said afterwards, it wasn't like watching paint dry, it was like listening to paint dry. On one occasion, he put up with somebody speaking for 7 hours, uninterrupted.
The agreement creates new institutions, a Northern Ireland Assembly, to restore to the people the fundamental democratic right to govern themselves.
Without Mitchell, you wouldn't have had a Good Friday Agreement. And that can be said about other individuals. Blair, without him, the Good Friday Agreement on the British side would never have progressed. And Jonathan Powell, who was his chief of staff at the time, said if we knew how hard it was going to be, we'd never have started. But they did start, and they did stick with it, and he did put a huge amount of time and effort into it.
Once these proposals are accepted and put in place, they offer at last, after decades of violence and conflict and injustice, the chance for peace and for democracy and equality for all.
In the same way with Bertie Ahern. There are times when you need people of a certain type of character to do certain jobs, and he was perfect for that kind of job, that ability to command detail, to take punishment. And then you had Trimble, embattled all during his leadership, an extremely difficult man. And yet at the same time, he, when faced with difficult choices, took those decisions and took the decision of releasing prisoners after 2 years.
There is a serious threat still from the real IRA, as there is from dissident loyalists as well.
He was meeting, and other unionist negotiators were meeting family, in the case of Jeffrey Donaldson, his brother killed by the IRA, in the case of Trimble, friends and relations.
We want to see Sinn Féin commit itself to the democratic process and to carry that commitment through positively in their actions.
They're meeting people each day who are sharing a marital bed minus a husband who has been murdered by the IRA. This was not easy stuff.
In recent weeks, the Ulster Unionist leadership have said that they agreed that we should jump together. Well, we have jumped. And as I look behind me, I see the spoiled children of unionism rooted firmly in the past.
It wasn't pretty to watch, but none of these things ever are.
I'll not be sitting and talking with a man who advocates murder, defends murder, and refuses to repudiate murder.
I do have to say well done to Wayne Paisley, because his are the politics of failure. He revels in failure. He revels in negativity. He revels in division. He revels in tearing down what others seek to put up. So well done, Ian.
I'm very disappointed, very angry, but I'm not going to show my anger. I'm very sad that, in effect, it had to get to this point.
Hume's contribution was extraordinary.
The time has come now to have faith in trust.
He was a man of extraordinary vision who held to a view that delivered in 1998 a political outcome that he and people like Seamus Mallon had been advocating in one form or another for 3 decades, and they had done so against a wall of IRA killings and savagery and all of the rest of it, and yet had pushed through an agreement in conjunction with Gerry Adams, in conjunction with David Trimble. None of these things are ever one-man bands, but there are individual contributions that are historic and noteworthy, and Hume was one of those. But yet his party suffered the ultimate price, was overtaken by Sinn Féin, and is, 25 years later, is wallowing in the doldrums without showing any significant signs of being able to resuscitate itself. Bill Clinton's interest was genuine and real and lasting, and he'd been involved with granting the visa to Joe Cahill, the IRA leader.
You have so much more to gain by working together than by drifting apart. Have the patience to work for a just and lasting peace. Reach for it. The United States will reach with you. The further shore of that peace is within your reach.
He started doing Paddy's Day dinners in the White House, and he put Ireland in an almost unique profile on Capitol Hill and on Washington, and our profile would not have been low starting with. And you saw with the Unionists in the early years their discomfort about being around Paddy's Day in Washington. It's all very green tinged and shamrocks and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, everybody knew that there was a political price that was going to be paid if they didn't continue to engage with Washington. And you can argue to an extent that, well, why would that matter? But it does matter in terms of human interactions. And at the end of it, all of this thing does come down to people being able to relate to each other as human beings. When you take away all the flags and everything else, at 4 o'clock in the morning, when you're all exhausted, there has to be some base level of acceptance of human equality. Otherwise, these things are never going to get over the line.
It's right to say no to the early release of pirates who have committed the most horrible of crimes.
Paisley was that voice on the margin of the talks.
We're not preparing a gallows to be hung on, nor are we velveting the rope to put round our necks. We're going to hang this agreement on the gallows they built for us.
I mean, even during the days of the latter Good Friday negotiations, with his midnight march to the Carson Monument and we'll not surrender and all of the usual tropes.
By and by, hallelujah for the cross.
Yet he was the person who then uniquely benefited from the outcome of it, and within a few years was part of the Chuckle Brothers with Martin McGuinness, and had come to the conclusion that this was the game in town and that he needed to roll with the punches.
We want a new future for all our people, all sections of our people.
The two parties who had, unique roles in preventing Northern Ireland coming to any sort of peaceful settlement, Sinn Féin on one side, the DUP on the other side, were also central to an agreement being reached in the form of Sinn Féin and an agreement being worked on subsequently in the form of the DUP.
And as we move forward to the new century, let us leave our terrible past behind and let us devote all our energies to building our new society,
with full and absolute respect for the identity of both sections of our people.
I mean, 25 years on, is it a success? Well, go and ask any person under the age of 40 in the South about their thoughts about Northern Ireland. And they won't be set against a landscape of violence. They won't be set against a landscape of waking up to the 7 o'clock headlines on RTE of 3 people killed in Castledarg or so many other places as they were over the years. So there is no doubt that it was the capstone to efforts that had been underway for years previously. We had the IRA ceasefire in '94, we had the resumption of the ceasefire in '96, and all of that. So, you know, the Good Friday Agreement was part of a stream, but nevertheless it was, in some ways, a concluding point along a long journey that allowed for a political structure to be created, that allowed for the creation of Stormont for a joint First Ministership with David Trimble and with Seamus Mallon, you know, which was difficult, which was argumentative, which was a whole lot of things, but which survived for a significant period. Now, in the more recent years, if you look at all the years over the 25 when the Northern institutions have not been functioning, that figure is large and it's current and it shows no sign of being able to be fixed, but fixed it is going to have to be.
I hope that the future will be dominated by normal politics and that violence is definitely a thing of the past.
There's going to be no return to violence. There are still pockets, small pockets, albeit still very serious, but there are small pockets of people who are still engaged in certain activity, and that needs to stop. And it's the job of all of us in political leadership to say that no to that it's not going to happen.
It is a unique agreement. It has left Northern Ireland in a better but imperfect place, where so many things have improved, but equally there are times when it is about the absence of war rather than the creation of peace.
We're pragmatic people, ladies and gentlemen. We always knew that the implementation of the agreement would present us with challenges, and so it has proved to be.
The peace agreement was the beginning, not the end.
If people don't learn how to build trust, to recognise the pain and injustice on the other side, as well as their own, to share some responsibility for what has gone before and for what must be in the future in Northern Ireland. If people can't do that, then politics, normal politics in Northern Ireland, will never take root.
You have a political system that is still sclerotic. When it's working, you have a system that is dominated to an unsatisfactory extent by Sinn Féin and by the DUP, and by the nature of the beast that leaves you with a political process that is faulty. The administrative system become used to knowing there's only 2 parties in town, everybody else, even if they're involved, are making up minor voices in the choir. That causes problems, and we can imagine what those problems are. So at some point, Northern Ireland is going to have to become a more normal polity, with a government, with an opposition, with all of the usual bits and pieces that are required to make a political system work.
I find myself always looking at the bits that didn't work, maybe, but maybe that's an Irish thing, that you're looking pessimistically. But so I agree with all of that, but I equally see that we should be marking what still needs to be done.
Currently what you have is a population that is not convinced that Stormont can work, because every time it starts, it stops. A population that wants to have decent local government and decent local services and all of the rest of that kind of thing. But at the same time, when issues happen, too often go back into their traditional heartlands of orange and green, or more accurately, they can be pushed there by voices who want to lead people into points of conflict rather than points of agreement. And in some ways, it does tell us something about a political landscape, that an agreement was agreed 25 years ago with endless hours of talks in a horrible office building in Stormont, but yet had a sense of discipline around at least much of the core elements of it, whereby people were able to talk privately. And if you were to try to do the same thing today in a world of social media and Instagram and Facebook and all of the rest of it would probably be impossible. That is, at one level, a reflection of hope in that we got an agreement, however imperfect, out of it, and at the same time it is almost a chorus of despair that we couldn't do it again were it ever to be necessary.